Okay, so I am Andrea Van Hoven, and I teach at the University of Michigan Law School. I teach in one of their many clinics over there. It's the Workers' Rights Clinic, previously known as the Unemployment Insurance Clinic. And Marie is actually one of our fabulous students over at the clinic. And so at the Workers' Rights Clinic, we deal a lot with unemployment. We deal with other workers' issues as well, but a lot of what we deal with is unemployment, and we deal a lot in the administrative tribunal arena. And it's very interesting to see the connections and the many similarities between the work we have done with the Property Tax Appeal Project and the administrative realm. One of the takeaways, at least, you know, from my perspective, is you just see a lot of unorganization and just a lot of these organizational infrastructure, organizational issues that truly could be better modified for the layperson. Because one of the themes and subjects that we'll kind of like touch on throughout our presentation here today is that the tax assessment arena, you know, people are trying to appeal their improper tax assessments. It's supposed to be a user-friendly layperson's process, okay? And the same thing applies to the work we do in the Workers' Rights Clinic for the unemployment individuals, the unemployment claimants. It's supposed to be user-friendly. And as you'll see throughout the presentation here today, it's really everything but user-friendly. And so that's where work like the Property Tax Appeal Project really comes into play. And you'll see towards the end of our slides, we'll talk a little bit about, we'll give you some statistics of what occurred throughout the project and some of the highlights. And you'll see that even though this is a layperson's process, supposed to be, right? If these people didn't have advocates, like the ones we'll describe for you today, they would be stuck with their very high overassessed property tax assessment. So with that, Marie will also introduce herself. Sorry for my novel there, but with that, go ahead, Marie. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, my name is Marie Sheehan. I am a rising 3L, and I worked with Professor Authorization and Professor Van Hoven to start the Property Tax Appeal Project at Michigan Law. And this project is it's a partnership between Michigan Law and the Coalition to help homeowners appeal, those living in owner-occupied homes, help them appeal their property tax assessments. There is another group in the coalition that also does this work, the Detroit Justice Center, but our presentation will largely focus on the work done by Michigan Law because that's the project Andrea and I worked on.
So just a little bit of an overview. This is going to be our roadmap for where we're going to go today. We're really going to talk about 5 main bullet points. Number 1, like it sounds like you've been speaking about maybe between maybe today and yesterday, the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. And then the background, we're going to give you kind of an educational background on the law governing these property tax assessments, because in order to really understand the work that PTAP does, that's the acronym that we use for property, for the organization. And so we have to talk a little bit about the background of the law, right? And so the statutes that govern the Michigan Constitution, and then we'll go into the appeals process. That's pretty much the bulk of what PTAP worked on over the past several months. The appeals process, as you'll learn, is like a 2-pronged appeals process. It's the assessor's review and then the March Board of Review. And the one component of the 2 that we sort of, you know, take issue with, as you've already been told, is sort of this assessor's review process. And you'll learn it's really, Michigan is like pretty much the only state in the nation that makes people go through this like 2-prong level. It's almost like a weeding out level. And so in order for people to appeal their tax assessments to the March Board of Review, they have to go through the assessor's review, right? And so if you don't go to the assessor's review, or you miss a certain step in that appeals process, then you really are kind of out of luck. You don't get to go to the March Board of Review. So I don't know the statistic on it. I don't know if we ever got the statistic, but it would be interesting to know how many of these people that really wanted to appeal their tax assessments didn't weren't able to, just because of, a failure to meet the requirements of the assessor's review. So we'll talk about those two separately. And then we'll talk about the property tax appeal project, just the overall structure, kind of the roles that went on to make this project happen and the process. And then we'll finish with the future of the property tax appeal project. I don't know how much you know about this PTAP project, but this was a pilot that we did. And so obviously this was the first time that we did this, and it was truly a lot of fun. It was really awesome. It was really, really cool to see kind of like where we were going to start and the ideas that, we had, and, how many flyers are we going to send out? How many people do we want to reach? What neighborhoods are we going to try, and assist? And so how many people, right? How many people with our man-woman workforce can we actually help, right? And you'll learn that we had a really high goal. We wanted kind of to help like thousands of people, but we really didn't have the man-woman power to maybe go that far, but we ended up helping quite a few people, and we're actually successful, I believe, on every one of their tax assessments, or their tax property appeals. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And I think Marie's going to talk a little bit about these goals.
Yeah, I was going to, but I think Professor Otoahene covered it. So I was just going to contextualize our work in terms of the coalition's goals. So by appealing people's property tax assessments, we are working towards goal 1, which is stopping unconstitutional property tax assessments. Yeah, so I'm going to keep going because the intro, I think, covered this. So now I'm going to get into the background law that governs property tax assessments and how they're supposed to be determined. But before I do, I just wanted to give you all a broad sense of how the property tax bill is generated. So it is this equation is slightly oversimplified, but we will go into the numbers in the next couple.
Did she freeze for you all, or is it just me?
No, I think she's frozen on my end too. Hold on one second. Let me get in touch with her.
So while we're trying to get with Marie, I do want to say something about her last slide, which is the, the 3 goals. And I told you the coalition really focuses on structural change. And so not only are we trying to, so the point is, Chris Berry showed you that slide that shows you all over America, this is a problem. And so part of the problem is poor people don't have anybody working on their behalf. And so we really are trying to, these property tax appeal projects are so important to have someone fighting for the little guy. And we need these projects all over America so that, again, inevitably, they will always get it wrong, right? I mean, not a lot, but any mass process gets things wrong. And we need some entities there to step in the gap for poor and disenfranchised homeowners to be able to protest the taxes. So it is a structural solution. We are, and so I want to bring that to your attention. Is Marie back?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, my apologies. I am not sure where I cut out, but
I think you cut out. You were just starting to introduce the property tax bill, and then I think you're on the next slide. Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to note that this is how the property tax bill is generated, where the assessed value or the value assigned to the property is multiplied by whatever the tax rate in that particular municipality is. And so we will just delve into the numbers briefly before getting into the appeals process. So this first provision at the top of the slide is the Section 3 of Article 9 of the Michigan Constitution, and this says that a property is supposed to be assessed at 50% of its true cash value. And the Michigan legislature and the courts have defined true cash value to be the the market value of the property, meaning like the selling price, what could you get between a willing seller and a willing buyer for the property. And so when you're actually appealing the property tax assessment, this is something to keep in mind, because you will look at other sales of similar properties and say, when this property was transferred between a willing seller and a willing buyer, this is what that property was sold for, and so that should be evidence of what this property is worth. So on the property tax assessment notice, which you will see in a little bit, there are 4 different numbers, so I'm just going to review those quickly now. The first is the true cash value, so what I just talked about, the market value of the home, the price that could be obtained at private sale. The second is the assessed value, so that is the 50% of the true cash value of the property. And then what Michigan does is in between every county and within every county, they will look at the assessments in all the localities and municipalities and adjust them or multiply them by what they call an equalization factor. So if one county is assessed at a rate just generally a little bit higher, they'll lower the assessments in that area, and vice versa. So they all try and make the assessments across the state uniform. So the state equalized value is basically just a slightly adjusted version of the property's assessed value. And if you see an equalization factor of 1, it just means that the assessed value and the state equalized value are the same thing. And then the taxable value of the property is either the state equalized value. So if it's 2020 and the property was sold in 2019, the taxable value and the state equalized value will be the same thing. But if the property hasn't been transferred, they'll just take the 2019 taxable value and multiply it by inflation, or I think it's 1.5%. So whichever is lower, it's usually the rate of inflation. And so if you own your property for a long time and the value of the property climbs quickly, the taxable value will be capped at a lower rate. And I just have like an example of that on the next slide. So this slide is really just to illustrate the difference between state equalized value and taxable value. So if, for example, a property was transferred in 2009, so then in 2010, state equalized value and taxable value are the same thing. The SEV and the taxable value would be set both at 100, and then let's say, you know, the value of the property really keeps increasing, but the taxable value will stay low. And then if, for example, the market plummets, or for some reason the property loses a lot of its value, and let's say it becomes worth 70, then the taxable value is supposed to, if the state equalized value is lower than this increased version of the taxable value, the state equalized value and the taxable value become equal again. So you can see how if the market crashes and properties lose a lot of value, the city doesn't necessarily have an incentive to recognize that, because it will take a long time for this taxable value, which is now capped, to catch up to state equalized value. And then, so because properties in Detroit were and are so overassessed, the city started to conduct a citywide reappraisal in 2014, and this took effect in 2017. And despite this reappraisal, this shows that the lowest value properties, $19,000 and less, are even more overassessed after the reappraisal than before the reappraisal. So despite the reappraisal, there is still a significant need for advocates to help with this property tax appeal process, because this reappraisal really hasn't solved the problem for the lowest value properties. The first,
can you go to the last slide? I want to make sure the students had a chance to look at that and understand what's going on here. Can someone throw in the chat, tell me what's going on in this chart? I want to make sure you understand this chart. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. Right, and how do we know the lower price? Tell me, describe what's going on in the chart. I just want to make sure everyone understands this chart. What's the significance of the green? What's going on? What do you see happening with the green here? Excellent. Okay, they get it. Go ahead, Marie.
Okay. Okay. So the first part of the appeals process for each homeowner is receiving from the city this assessment notice. And this is a notice that tells you all of the numbers that we just talked about. So if you look at the box on the document, the first value that's listed is the taxable value, and it will list it for the current tax year and the previous tax year. It will note if there's any changes. The same for assessed value, it lists the equalization factor and then the state equalized value. And then lastly, it notes if the property was transferred in the previous year, which would impact whether or not taxable value equals state equalized value, or whether taxable value is an adjusted version of the previous year's taxable value.
And something important here. So Professor Atuahene actually touched on it earlier when we were discussing the people that organizations like PTAP are trying to reach and help. These people, they don't have, first of all, there's a major digital divide in the city of Detroit. So what do I mean by that? I mean, access to information is not as easy or readily available to these people as it may be like for you or I, okay? People don't really all have cell phones, for instance, to maybe Google, you know, what is a tax bill? What is a notice of assessment? What does the taxable valuation mean? Like, people that get these documents, I don't know about you, but even when I look at this document, doesn't seem very user-friendly to me. So this is why it's even more important that people like those who are working as part of PTAP go out into these communities, educate them. We all know that education is extremely powerful, right? Because people don't know what they don't know. And when the Detroit homeowners, when residents in Detroit are receiving documents like this, I mean, just look at it, right? Look at the font, for instance. I mean, we could really pull apart this document. We could slice and dice it pretty well, right? I don't know about you, but I know the document's kind of small because it's on the screen. But even if it were, you know, you were touching it and it was tangible, there's some very important fine print here that if you don't read, you are not appealing your assessment, right? And does anybody just want to maybe throw out what's one thing you notice in this small print that could be problematic for people if they don't read it? Anyone?
Go ahead and throw it in the chat.
Yeah. I like the last comment, by the way, that you're struck that this is what folks are receiving. Yeah, great. Okay, the appeals deadline. Marie knows very well that those deadlines were making my blood boil during the time in which we were trying to appeal these things, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. The appeals deadlines were actually extended because the assessors board and the people that are supposed to actually be doing their jobs with regard to these assessments weren't doing it fast enough and weren't doing it within their own timelines. And so the deadlines were actually extended. I think it was a week or so, Marie, wasn't it about a week? But that's interesting in and of itself, because how are these homeowners supposed to know that the deadlines were even moved, right? We go back to our digital divide. Maybe that would have been a nice thing to put on your website, or I think they ended up actually, no, I don't actually think they did put it on their website, now that I think about it. But, that would be a nice thing to have. But again, how are people supposed to know that, right? So the appeals deadline, that is pretty problematic. What else is problematic here on this document? If you are a homeowner trying to make an appeal by yourself without an advocate. I see a comment here about working within a 2-week window, right? So, just the mere fact of what people have to actually accomplish in such a short time frame, it's just not doable, right? It's just not. And I believe there is some language here. I'm going to go to the next slide. Actually, Marie's going to go to the next slide because I can't go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about some more of these issues. We have here assessor's review schedule, and then they give you some dates and times. That is totally vague and ambiguous, right? We're all lawyers here. Vague and ambiguous is one of our favorite words. So is reasonable. But this is vague, right? What is Friday? What's happening on Friday from 8:30 to 4:30? What's happening at that date and time? What am I supposed to do, right? And if we keep reading here, let's read the part. I just have to lean in here. Okay, so it keeps telling people how they must appeal, right? You must appeal during the assessor's review period. One thing we notice here, and as you're all, future lawyers in the making, you learn in law school, and you learn when you actually are practicing law, that words mean something, and what's not on paper, that also means something. And as lawyers, we have to really go through documents, especially contracts. I don't know if any of you have taken contracts class yet. That's a doozy. But, words, periods, exclamation points, right? All these semicolons, they all mean something, right? And what's missing here, it doesn't even tell us really who the assessor's review board or those people are, or the March board of review. We see that a little bit later right here in the middle. Must appeal directly to the March board of review. That can be very confusing for the layperson, right? So why am I appealing to an assessor's review and then I'm going to a March board of review? What's that? So what's missing here is any descriptions even of what these boards really do. And again, if you were wanting to, if I were to receive this and had some questions, I'd probably pick up my phone and I'd Google something, and there we go. What are these people doing who don't have a phone, who don't have access to internet, who don't have friends or family that even know what's going on? And maybe they're receiving these documents too, and they're confused and they don't know what's going on. But one of the most, I believe, critical issues here is the next section that we have, where it says note, right? Protest appeals. That's not even clear. Is a protest the same thing as an appeal? Why is that word in parentheses, right? I mean, we can lawyer this document all day, but the protest appeals during the assessor's review period may be made in person, by letter, or email. Well, okay, that's problematic. In person. Okay, where do I go? Is that what that assessor's review schedule refers to? Is that are those your in-person hours? I mean, that's completely vague and ambiguous by itself as well. By letter. Okay, well, that's also problematic, because as we actually encountered, we encountered this issue ourselves, and here we are, the advocates, right? So we're the experts on the topic. What does that mean? Does it have to actually be sent and received by a certain date and time? Can I mail it? If it's due on the 10th, for instance, and I mail it on the 10th, it's timely, right? Well, no, the mail takes 2 to 3 days, maybe more to get there. Is it still going to be considered received on time? Because as we learned, no, if you mail it, it's not going to be received on time. You have to get it to them by the day, and actually the time stamp of when they're going to close their doors, right? Or by email, February 5th, by February 15th. February 15th was the original due date that was put on these tax assessment forms. And I think someone actually mentioned this in the chat. By the time you receive this form, I mean, realistically, you have a couple of days before that February 15th deadline hits. Okay. And you have to think to yourself, that means if you really go through the steps in your head, a person has to actually go to the mailbox, right? I mean, I'm going to be honest, I don't go to my mailbox every day. Sometimes I just don't get to the mailbox, and I'm on maternity leave right now. I'm taking care of an infant. I really don't get to the mailbox, right? I'm lucky if I can go outside and get some breath of fresh air, some sunshine. I don't really get there. In a pandemic, right? We're in a pandemic. I'm afraid to go to the mailbox. So, if you don't check your mail for a couple of days, or what about the people on vacation or that are just out doing whatever? Okay. So you get your mail, and now you have to, let's say you're a couple days late doing that, and you're approaching this deadline, and you're actually aware of the deadline because you read the print that size 0.0005. You have to now create an appeal. And then, so that begs the next question. Somebody please tell me, and we might have to go back to the other document, where on the yellow sheet does it explain what the appeal looks like? Okay. Go ahead, take your time, look for it. It's just not there, right? And that was another piece it was so interesting doing this project as like a pilot, right? Because as a pilot, it's kind of like a movie that no one's seen before, right? And we're all in this together for the first time. We don't know how it's going to really start. We don't know what's going to happen in the middle. We certainly don't know how it's going to end. Thankfully, in our position, we had a great ending. It was a very successful ending. But where on the sheet does it say to me how to even appeal, right? Because again, as you will learn as lawyers, when you are litigating, I don't know how many of you want to go and be litigators in court, but if you don't abide by, let's say, the Michigan court rules, the federal rules, if you don't abide by the rules like to a T, you can pretty much count yourself. It'll be an unlucky situation, right? It's going to be problematic. Your complaint, let's say, if you're a plaintiff, could be kicked out. So what if the person, just writes a sentence? That's all they write. I'm appealing this because I think it's wrong. I'm appealing this because my calculations are different. If they even know how to make those calculations, right? It doesn't say any of that here. And actually, and we'll talk about, Marie will share her insight at the actual March Board of Review meeting that we had, because that was the part of the project where we had to go and actually argue our positions on behalf of all of these clients. There were things that the board members were actually looking for. There were different aspects of the argument that they were looking for, and some of these aspects we didn't even have as the experts. I mean, we pretty much had 99% of what they were looking for, but it was kind of like, this scavenger hunt, right? So if we as the experts, and this is another theme I sort of just wanted to make sure was kind of clear to you all, the property tax appeal project, it really is a project that is looked at through the lens of us as the expert, as the advocate, right? And as the client, right? So those lenses are very important, because what's confusing for the layperson was even quite confusing for us. We had to find, examples, right? We had to find some examples, like what do these things look like? And lo and behold, there's not really a standard for what the appeals are supposed to look like, right? So you can't Google. I mean, you can, you'll come up with a few things, but you really can't Google for the city of Detroit, what does the appeal look like? What are all the elements I have to hit? It's really not that straightforward. It's sort of a situation where, if you can figure it out, good for you. You've made it. It's kind of like this race, right? But for the layperson receiving this document, we again don't have, for the advocate receiving this document, we don't have a very clear description of what we even need to do here. And notably, some of our clients, this is going to throw you, makes my blood boil. Some of our clients didn't even receive these notices until a few days before the appeal deadline. And that was not because they were on vacation or out of their home or not checking their mail. This is because they weren't even sent, right? So by no fault of their own, they were not sent timely to these people. So they had, and a lot of people, I can't generalize, I guess, but I would assume that when a person is receiving this letter, they might not even bother with trying to appeal it, right? They might not even bother with trying to write an appeal. And you have to almost ask yourself, is that kind of like a goal, right, of letters like this? I mean, certainly just the font right? Look at this letter. This is not a tax bill. I mean, it doesn't scream, hey, here's your rights, right? And as lawyers, right, we are all about advocating for people's rights. And so going back to the comment that Professor Ottawahene made, it is all about going out and pounding the pavement for these people. These people, I did not poll every one of them, but I can speak on basically my perspective of working with Marie and others on this project. It wouldn't shock me if they didn't even know that they could appeal. And it wouldn't shock me if they didn't even know they had rights to appeal. And that's where we come in as the advocates and we say, you have rights. I mean, we literally sent flyers in envelopes to these people. And on the front of the envelope, you know, and in the description in the envelope, we were like, hey, here's your rights. Do you know your property is being overassessed? I mean, if that, how sad is that, right? That people have to actually go out and do something. You know, it's sad and it's obviously amazing at the same time, but it's like, we have to go out and do this for the people that are voiceless. We have to be the voice for the voiceless. They have no other avenue otherwise. I don't know if we'll share any client testimonies in this piece, but I know certainly, because I read them with my own eyes, that we had, and I heard them in the voicemails, we had several clients saying things to us like, I could never have done this without an advocate walking me through, an advocate being by my side. I would have taken the paper and thrown it in the trash. And that is extraordinarily sad, at least to me. So, I mean, other just small things here that we've kind of touched on, you know, if your property's assessed value has increased, this document certainly does not tell you why, okay? So that's also problematic. I mean, you basically have a yellow document you're shooting out to like thousands of residents with, you know, this is what you owe, but we're not going to tell you why, okay? And we actually see the same kind of parallels in the unemployment world. You've been denied benefits. We're not really going to tell you why. And if we are going to tell you why, it's going to be a boilerplate reason that we tell everybody why you've been denied. And, you know, just to recap, you know, again, please understand these appeal instructions are just bad. They don't tell you what the legal arguments are that you need to consider in your appeal. They don't refer you to city codes. What about city codes or state statutes? I mean, that's like Rule 101. If you're going to take away something from someone, right? I mean, just from the very basic elementary standpoint, if you're going to take away something, or you're going to lower, obviously, or excuse me, increase, not lower, if you're going to increase the assessment here, maybe a good idea to explain your legal authority. And that was something we came across a lot. We poked and prodded many of the Detroit authorities on that, different levels of people on the board. We asked them point blank, okay, you're doing X, but why? And where do you have the legal authority to do that? That's the hook, right? Because you can't have a taking without the statute giving you the legal basis to do so. You have to have the authority. And it was interesting because we would ask that question, you know, what's your authority? What's your legal authority for this? And a lot of times we really just didn't get an answer, or it was kind of vague. And that's problematic, right? And as we also learned through this project, we would make various substantive steps on behalf of our client. And then like a new rule would all of a sudden be promulgated. So it was almost like we were playing this board game and the rules kept changing. And we as the advocates knew, but the clients certainly wouldn't have known, again, because the information was not pushed to them. So hopefully what you're seeing here is a structural issue that certainly needs to be rectified, and that certainly there's a bunch of holes here, and that organizations like PTAP and others can come in to the rescue and sort of fix and aid. And this is how things get done, right? When there's issues like the ones we're dealing with here with these assessments, it takes organizations like PTAP and others to expose those issues and make them better for the public. And again, you know, they don't tell you online, where you can find more information. And there's no advocates list either. In the unemployment world, if you're denied unemployment benefits, there's actually an advocate list that is provided to you. So if you can't afford legal representation, you can have an advocate free of charge who can fight on your behalf. And that list, you know, it's like a 2-page list. We don't even have that here, okay, for these people. And, you know, I would say, and I'll end on this slide, going through the March Board of Review process myself and sitting in the room with all these, you know, board members, it could be pretty intimidating for the lay person. You know, I mean, it could be pretty intimidating. You're one person before, you know, a minimum of, what was it? I don't even know, 10, 11 people in a small room with one fan. Yes, in the middle of a pandemic. We might talk a little bit about that. I almost passed out, literally. But, you know, that could be a little intimidating. And so, you know, I guess the process in and of itself, it really almost, what did someone say here? Yeah. Oh, there's lots of comments here. This one here. Yeah. I mean, just, it's very problematic. And I can't express enough how much my blood, like I can barely get the words out. I'm so passionate about the work we've done with this program. I just feel so terrible because I don't know where these people would be without programs like PTAP. So with that, we can go to the next slide, Marie.
Okay.
Hold on, it's a little frozen on my screen here.
Okay.
Are we on slide 11 now? Okay, here we go. Okay, so this just, again, reemphasizes the appeal timeline of February 15. So the homeowner or their advocate must submit an appeal letter to the assessor's review board. Again, remember I said there's an assessor's review stage, there's a March Board of Review. To get to the March Board of Review, which is the goal, that's where you have your oral argument of a couple minutes. You must give your appeal. And by the way, the appeal is in writing, right? So this is not an oral appeal. This is in writing to the assessor's review board. You're basically writing down why you think their number is wrong and hopefully attaching some evidence to support that. Also attaching maybe some photos of why you think the assessment is off. We're talking maybe, you know, structural damage of your home, et cetera. If an advocate is submitting the letter, they must also submit a notarized letter of authorization. We bring this point up in this slide to show you how there's even like additional barriers that are magically thrown into the process here. So, you know, if you don't want to appeal by yourself, I mean, not that it's hard enough, and you have an advocate who can appeal for you, that's fine. But now we're going to add another layer. We're going to make sure that the advocate also submits this letter of authorization. Oh, and hold on, it has to be notarized. Well, that's tricky in and of itself. I don't know if anyone's ever had to get anything notarized, but it's sort of a pain in the ass. And not only did it have to be notarized, but now we're in a pandemic. So how are we notarizing things, right? It's just kind of like another layer that doesn't seem that necessary. And again, where's the info that's readily available for that? So if you went out, so we were the advocates for all the clients we helped. If we kind of missed the fine print or didn't know about this letter of authorization, none of our appeals would have been accepted. And I can tell you from firsthand knowledge that the student advocates who worked on those worked tirelessly, long hours, many drafts to get it in tip-top shape. It would have been devastating if we were told, nope, can't turn those in, don't have your letter of authorization. And it really is more, in my opinion, of formality. During the 2020 appeal cycle that we just finished doing in the spring, the city actually extended the deadline to February 22nd again, because it mailed the assessment notices late. But it was really at that time, now that I'm really, you know, reliving this all over again, it was quite stressful because even though they extended the deadline to February 22nd, again, it wasn't really that obvious that they extended it. I forget how we even learned. I think we learned through an email or something. You know, how we're all, so we knew the extension of the deadline for our clients. What about all the other people? They had additional time. They had another week to submit their appeals. but they didn't know that. And I would suspect, again, this is me just suspecting, I would suspect that those people who didn't know about the extension and who were going to be late, maybe just didn't send something in. So now you get an extension and there's no way for you to really know about the extension. And that's pretty sad. And I think Marie was going to talk a little bit about the comparable properties and the structural damages that we had to write about with these appeals in order to try and petition for a lower assessment.
Yeah, I'm seeing a question also in the chat that says, did they mail assessment notices late this year because of COVID or lack of personnel like we've read? I think that really the assessments were coming in February, so this was pre any sort of state of emergency being declared in Michigan or any positive cases of COVID in Michigan.
Yeah, that was not a COVID. It was definitely not a COVID problem.
Yeah, and we had clients who didn't get their notices until truly days before we submitted the appeal, and so this, if we hadn't reached out to people who we thought were potentially overassessed, they might not have ever known or really had time to create an appeal. And so when we wrote the appeals, we included two common arguments in every appeal. So the first is that we would look at sales of homes in the client's area. So we usually tried to stick kind of within a half mile of the client's property, and to homes with similar features. So thinking about like size of the property in terms of square footage, stories, acreage of the property, age of the property, like numbers of bedrooms and bathrooms. And so then we say, because these homes are similar and their market, the price of these homes reflects an assessed value much lower than what you assigned our clients, you should use this as evidence to lower the assessed value. And then the second big argument in every appeal is that when the assessors are assessing property, they're not looking inside of the property, they're looking at, they're doing it in a mass way. And so this, we would say, there are particularities to this house that the assessor did not consider, including maybe there's a crack in the foundation, or there's a perpetual leak in a window that's now led to, rot in this particular wall, or there's a mold issue, or there's a termite issue, or what be it, or this bathroom just doesn't work. They haven't fixed it yet, or they're in the process of fixing it. And so we would go into help homeowners take photos of that damage and describe it in the letters, and include that in the letters as well.
And I'm just looking through some of the comments that we have in the chat box, and I love where your minds are going, right? I love how things are kind of firing. One that I'm seeing here is some thoughts and ideas, like there should be a chart or a graph or a diagram or flow chart or something. And it's kind of like, yeah, maybe, and I love that. I love that comment, because we too, throughout the process, because you have to understand, we did not, facilitate the pilot program knowing everything, right? It was very much a learn as you go process, right? Because PTAP has not been around for decades, okay? So a lot of what we were doing, a lot of the work that we were doing was kind of like a learn as you go. We were coming up with the infrastructure kind of as we went in a very compressed timeline, mind you. And another interesting thing to point out about the project, it's not like we had this set infrastructure. And when I use the term infrastructure, I'm saying like a phone, for instance, for clients to call in, a voicemail. When you go to work every day, there's a place to go, right? Who's going to notarize these letters, getting a notary. If you want to meet with a client, where are you meeting? You open up a business or something, you need an infrastructure to run it, right? Pens, paper. I mean, we literally had a paper issue at one point. Where's the paper coming from? How much paper do we need? Stamps. We need stamps. Who's paying for the stamps? So all of those considerations are things that need to be taken into account for a project to work. And because of the compressed timeline we were on, we were making that infrastructure kind of as we went. And it was so cool to see that we were able to do that and also be successful at the same time. So I don't want you to, assume that we had this perfect gem, going into this thing. It really is a lesson on anything can happen. You can literally do anything if you just put your mind to it, and you're passionate about the work, and you just keep moving forward, right? It was daunting at times, like, oh, are we going to actually get this stuff out in time? I mean, there's so many considerations, right? What about the fact that, but you got to think about timeline, right? So the person has to receive the flyer, because they don't know who we are, right? They don't know who Wayne law and Michigan law. They don't really know who we are. They don't know us personally. Can they trust us? I don't know if I got a letter in the mail that was like, your property tax assessments might be wrong. I don't know if I would believe it right away. And so we had a lot of those concerns to worry about, to make sure everything was flowing by a very strict deadline. So when I see comments like that about making it, this one says it's overwhelming, you got to make it more user friendly. It is totally overwhelming, right? It needs to be more user friendly. And these are all really great things to be thinking about as you're going through a process like this. And as you actually go out into your individual lawyer careers, you should always be thinking in the back of your mind, how can we make the process better, right? Because everything with Property Tax Appeal Project really turned on process, right? I even was sitting in was it Willie's office? I was sitting in one of the representative's offices at one point. I don't even remember anymore exactly who it was. I was in so many offices. And he was explaining some kind of spreadsheet that the city uses to make these appeals happen. And it was kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, and it was very confusing, and it was how they organized multiple parcel appeals. So if you were going to appeal on behalf of many people, that was another interesting thing we learned. If you were going to appeal on behalf of multiple people, which we were appealing on behalf of multiple people, I think the number was like 9, more than 9 or more than 10, you had to fill out like an Excel spreadsheet. But that in and of itself, how do we even know we're supposed to fill out an Excel spreadsheet? Also, where is that Excel spreadsheet? It actually was online on the city's website. However, it was in a spot that took you 3,000 years to find. I mean, I have gray hair from trying to find it. And, I remember, Marie, being in that restaurant when we actually found it, and we were like, oh my gosh, here's the Excel spreadsheet. And if I could show it to you all, I don't have it right now. How Excel goes for a long, it's very lengthy, okay? It was so long, and it was so tiny, and the boxes were small, and the font was so small, and it's like, what do we need to actually put here? And at one point, when we actually turned in our first set of appeals to the assessor's review, we were asked about the Excel spreadsheet. So we were asked, like, where is that sheet? And we're like, what? And here we showed up with like these amazingly beautiful, I have to brag on behalf of the students. I mean, they put together 68. I can never remember the number. I always think it's 68 or 69. 68. So the document you're looking at right now, the student advocates created one of those appeals for every single client. So they had this document that you're looking at 68 times. And this document looks like a 2-page document. Most of them were this was not a 2-page. They were all about 8 or 9 pages or longer, because you would have the legal argument like you're looking at right now, and then attached to the legal argument, you would have photos of the house, right? And actually, a note on that, the photos didn't just magically appear, right? We had to have student advocates go out and actually take the photos themselves of these people's homes, if they were allowed in, hopefully, right? Or have the people send photos, but that was also difficult because, again, digital divide, not everybody has access to a phone where they can take pictures and send them. And really, I guess one of the most critical pieces of trying to lower your overassessed tax assessment was the photos themselves, to show, well, listen, the house really isn't worth that because look at this crack in the foundation. I don't know much about cracks in foundations, but I do know if you have one in your house, it is a problem. So, that needs to be lowered just based on the fact of this crack. And how are you supposed to know to include photos unless you have an advocate? I would bet that lots of these appeals coming in without advocates did not have photos. So, you know, that's another thing that is taken into account with this. And another thing that you need to think about as you're running a pilot program like this, timing, got to get those photos. Got to get those photos before this very strict deadline. And unfortunately, there's no extension. So, you know, in the law, when you're litigating and you need an extension because you can't finish your motion on time, you can ask the court, you can petition the court for an extension. As we go through and we're thinking about great ideas to change the process, that's another thing. What about petitioning for an extension? Because you're waiting on something, right? You can't get your photos in on time. You're trying, you're doing the best you can. It's not a question of being lazy. You're trying to get your pieces of the appeal together. And no, there's just strict timelines. And if you can't make it, sorry, no exceptions. And that is really pathetic. I think we were going to talk a little, Marie, were you going to talk a little bit more about this document?
Yeah, just I think to know, I just wanted to point out like how we presented the damage to or whatever kind of repairs had yet to be made to the client's home. And then this is where we presented comparable property evidence. And so just to think about the amount of, like, if you had to go about figuring out this whole system and only had like 4 days to put this together and had to get photos, and then sometimes you can also include like an estimate of repair. So then going out and getting a contractor to come to your home and make an estimate just to get all of this done in a week is not really feasible. And so that I think is like another, that the timeline issue was very front of mind during the entire process. And I also didn't want to skip, I see that Megan had a comment in the chat, doesn't Detroit get their money from the county no matter what? And so the way that the taxes work is the county does pay the city the delinquent taxes and then takes the right to like foreclose on the property via the tax foreclosure process. So the city doesn't really have an incentive to properly tax people because they get paid no matter what. And so I just didn't want to skip that question. And I will go on to the next slide.
And Marie, stay on this one for just a second, and you'll see here, I want you also to understand, this was not this was kind of a model, right? So all of the 68 appeal letters kind of had this look, right? But each and every one of them was very tailored to the person's home, okay? And you can see, if you read in the middle paragraph, it talks about like parcel blank has extensive structural damage that the division did not account for when calculating the assessed value. Specifically, the property has a cracked brick foundation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's lawyering right there, right? So a lay person, these individuals we were helping in the city of Detroit, they don't know enough of how to artfully, because what do we learn as lawyers, right? We learn to be very, very persuasive and how to write artfully, right? It's very artful that we would say, you know, specifically the property's missing this and that. These lay people are not thinking that way, right? They're not thinking, oh, let me look at the crack in my foundation. Oh, let me look at this leaking roof. They're not really thinking that way necessarily, right? That's where we step in and really assist them by being able to craft something this way. And it's all the truth, right? It's all the truth. And the I keep saying student attorneys, they're referred to student attorneys in the clinic I work in, the student advocates, you know, they had to spend countless hours with these clients on the phone, asking them, you know, to talk about, okay, how many bedrooms does your house have? You know, what does your house look like from the outside, from the inside? Getting really specific about things. And all the while you're running on this, don't forget this clock, this deadline, right? You need to fact gather as fast as you can and focus on the most important aspects of the house. And another consideration to take into account is that a lot of these people are very nervous. They don't know you, right? They don't want to talk about their cracked foundation. They don't want to talk about their leaking roof. They don't want to send pictures of the black mold in the bedrooms where the children sleep. You know, they don't want to talk about these things because it's quite frankly embarrassing for a lot of people. You know, it's a very sad situation that a lot of people are faced with, you know, and so building that trust was another really key component of this project and making this project really happen successfully. And the student advocates were amazing at that, at really building this trust so quickly. Because, a lot of people wouldn't talk about that stuff, but talking about it, talking about these structural issues was necessary, because that's what's going to be the hook to help lower these assessments.
Since we only have a couple of minutes left before the Q&A, do we want to just kind of quickly go through the rest of the process? Andrea, is that okay?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay. So in early March, the homeowner receives the assessor's review decision, and then this is a standard decision form. All of our clients, a few got reductions. They were like modest, if any. And the appeal language is equally bad as kind of the assessment notices. So here is kind of a zoomed in version of the appeal language on the assessor's review decision, explaining how you would go to the next stage of the appeal, which is the March Board of Review, where actual reductions are usually granted. And then in the second Monday in March, you submit your appeal to the March Board of Review. And then in mid-March, you present to the Board of Review, and at the time that you present is the first time that you see this green form, which actually outlines the considerations that the board has when making reductions. And this is when you actually have already gathered and you're presenting your evidence, and this is the first time that you see their criteria. And so I have a photo of that form here. And here you can see all of their criteria. And then ultimately you get, in early May, we got our decisions. And then this is what they look like. And again, they don't really explain why any reductions were or were not granted. They have similar language, the other two notices, about how you could appeal further to the March tax tribunal. They don't really explain filing fees or what kind of requirements go into that process. Do we want to move on?
Importantly, the information that, and again, you would not know this as the layperson, we barely knew it as the advocate, the information that you give at the assessor's review, you're pretty much limited. And that's the information that you have to present to the March Board of Review, right? And that can be problematic, because what if something's left out or whatever? But that's another limitation that's unfortunately built into the system.